Every morning in this small coffee shop began with a feeling of mystical anticipation. When I entered, a gentle morning atmosphere already prevailed, and the scent of freshly ground coffee filled the entire space. It was my ritual, my way of starting the day off right. Michael stood behind the counter, touching the coffee beans with his agile hands. His hair was slightly tousled, and he focused on preparing the drinks as if it were an art form. "Good morning," he greeted me with a wide smile, which, it seemed to me, warmed not only me but the entire coffee shop. "Good morning, Michael," I replied with a smile, finding joy in the fact that he remembered my name. Once, at the beginning of our acquaintance, I looked at the menu for a long time, trying to decide what to try today. Michael noticed my deliberations and approached me to help. "Don't know where to start?" he asked with a slight smirk. "Yes, there are so many delicious options," I answered, feeling a little awkward. Michael approached the coffee machine and started making something special. "Try my signature drink," he said. "I'm sure you'll like it." I watched as he professionally worked with the coffee machine, extracting aromatic nuances from each cup. Soon before me was not just a drink, but a true work of art, adorned with foam and chocolate sprinkles. "Please enjoy," said Michael, offering me the drink. I took the first sip and almost closed my eyes with pleasure. In this small cup was hidden the taste of true happiness. This is amazing," I murmured. Michael smiled, and his eyes shone with joy. "Glad you liked it. If you want, I can make it for you every morning." From that day on, our morning routine began. I came for a cup of coffee, and Michael prepared something new and delightful. But it was not just about coffee. We started talking about books, music, travel, and much more. Our conversations became my daily dose of inspiration and positivity. Over time, our meetings became not just a morning habit, but a special moment that made my days brighter. Michael was an ordinary guy, but he became special to me. Our first meeting in the coffee shop turned out to be the beginning of something more significant than I could have imagined. My mother, Elizabeth, was a woman who always knew what she wanted. She was from a wealthy and influential family, and her decisions were always final. Mother was a tall woman with a stern posture and long chestnut hair which she always wore neatly combed back. One day, she called me into her office. This office was a real sanctuary for my mother, a place where she made important decisions. The office was decorated with luxurious paintings and soft armchairs. "Emily, I want you to meet my close friend's son, Victor." I was stunned. Mother was always a powerful woman, but she had not yet interfered in my personal life. "Why, Mom?" Her eyes, cold and relentless, met mine. "Victor is a good guy from a respected family. He can provide you with the future you dream of." I didn't know how to tell my mother that my dream was not about wealth or social status. My dream was true love, and I felt I had found it in Michael. "Mom, I date whoever I want," I said, trying to maintain at least some independence. Elizabeth looked at me grimly. "I'm waiting for you to meet Victor. He invited us to lunch in 2 weeks." With those words, she released me from her office, but I felt her influence on my life had only just begun. A few days later, when I came to the cafe to see Michael again, he noticed that I was a little tense. "Did something happen?" he asked, cleaning the coffee machine. I told Michael about the conversation with my mother and her desire for me to date Victor. His face expressed deep sympathy, and he took my hand. "Listen, Emily, no one can choose your destiny except you," he said, looking into my eyes. "You have to do what makes you happy." Those words gave me hope but also tormented me with doubts. My mother was a strong, influential person, and refusing her was not simple. But I understood that I could not sacrifice my own happiness for her ambitions. With each passing day, my mother's intervention became more persistent. She arranged lunches and meetings with Victor, and I felt her pressure on me. My soul was torn between her expectations and my feelings for Michael. I knew I would have to make a decision, and it would have far-reaching consequences. My internal conflict only intensified, and I didn't know how to resolve it. My days have been weighing on me like a heavy burden. The time spent with Victor was filled with luxury and extravagance, but lacking the warmth and tenderness I found with Michael. Every day, the fear of losing Michael grew stronger. Michael and I continued to meet in the morning at the coffee shop, but since my mother started insisting on my relationship with Victor, our meetings became short and tense. Michael felt like I was pushing him away, and despite his understanding, it was difficult for both of us. One day, as he was making me coffee, he took my hand and looked me in the eyes. "Emily, are you okay?" he asked. I sighed, feeling tears on the verge of spilling out. "Michael, my mother keeps insisting that I date Victor. I don't know what to do." He nodded, understanding me. "Listen, we'll get through this together. You're not alone in this." Michael was always my support, but even he couldn't rid me of the fear of loss. Every night, I woke up from nightmares of possibly losing him forever. My mother became increasingly pushy, and I saw her weaving around me like a spider's web from which escape was difficult. One day, Victor proposed to me. His proposal was accompanied by a ring adorned with a precious gemstone. I looked at this ring, and it seemed like a heavy burden that I would have to carry for the rest of my days. But how could I refuse my mother, who so strongly wanted this marriage? "Emily, you would make me the happiest person on earth." I looked at him, but my gaze was filled with doubt and fear. I knew that by accepting this proposal, I would be able to secure my future and remain a part of an influential family. But on the other hand, I would lose Michael and the possibility of true love. "We can be happy together, Emily. I'm ready to give you peace and luxury." Michael was right, the choice was mine. I felt squeezed between my mother's expectations and my own feelings. This was a decision that could change my life forever, and I didn't know which one to choose. The evening was filled with tension that I felt in every cell of my body. I had spent the whole day contemplating about my future and both of my lives, the one I wanted and the one my mother expected of me. Every glance in the mirror reflected my inner frustration. In the evening, I went on a date with Victor, who had chosen a special place, a luxurious restaurant overlooking the lake. The moonlight reflected in the water, creating a magical atmosphere. He was waiting for me at the table, smiling and offering me his hand, like a prince from a fairy tale. I took his hand, but it felt cold and unfamiliar to me. "You look stunning, Emily," said Victor, looking at me with admiration. I smiled in response, but it was forced. My eyes searched for Michael, hoping to see him in this restaurant, but he wasn't there. During dinner, the conversation was about the future Victor envisioned for us, his plans for travel, luxury, and wealth. I listened to his words, but my thoughts were somewhere far off. Finally, as dinner was coming to an end, Victor took my hand in his and, looking into my eyes imploringly, said, "Emily, be my wife." He pulled out a beautiful box, and my eyes saw the ring with a precious gemstone that he had offered me before. It was a precious ring that symbolized luxury and status. My mother was right next to me, and I could secure my future, but at the same time, I would lose my freedom of choice and the chance to be with the man I truly loved. I looked at Victor, his eyes full of expectation and fear. I knew that now, my destiny depended on how I would answer this question. My hands were trembling, but my heart was calm. I realized that I could not accept his proposal, even for my mother's sake. "Victor, I can't." His face changed, and his eyes filled with disappointment and bitterness. "Why, Emily? We could be happy together." I sighed, struggling to hold back tears, because my happiness is not in money and luxury, but in true love, and I have found it in someone else. With these words, I stood up and left the restaurant, leaving Victor among stunned waiters and guests. It was a fateful proposal, but I chose my own happiness, even if it meant losing my mother's support. After Victor's proposal, I returned home feeling like something inside me was tearing apart. Michael had been in my life for so long, and we had gone through many moments together. We were best friends, lovers, and a support system for each other. I knew that my decision would bring him pain, and my soul was bleeding at the thought of it. I decided that he needed to know the truth. I called him and invited him to meet me at the coffee shop where we first met. When Michael arrived, His gaze was filled with anticipation, and I saw a glimmer of hope in his eyes. He smiled when he saw me, and at that moment, it hurt even more. "Emily, how was your evening?" he asked. I looked up and met his gaze. My eyes were full of tears. "Michael, I'm so sorry." His smile began to fade, and he realized that something was wrong. "What happened, Emily? You're scaring me." I sighed and began to tell him the whole story about Victor's proposal, about my mother's pressure, about my internal conflict. Michael listened to me silently. His face was pale, and I saw bitterness in his eyes. "And you turned down his proposal?" he asked. His voice sounded broken. "Yes," I whispered. "Because I can't sacrifice our love, Michael. You mean more to me than money and social status." Michael took my hands in his, and I saw tears streaming down his cheeks. "I love you too, Emily, more than anything else in the world. But what do we do now?" My soul was tearing apart, and I knew our future was uncertain. We both understood that we couldn't be together anymore, and it was one of the hardest decisions in my life. We spent hours in that coffee shop, remembering our moments together and saying goodbye to each other. When Michael left, I felt like a part of me had left with him. This breakup was painful and difficult, but I knew it was the only right decision. Our love would remain in my heart forever, but now I had to go my own way, even if it was full of uncertainty. After breaking up with Michael, my life changed forever. Victor became my fiancé, and we moved into his enormous mansion that felt like a real palace. Everything was luxurious and expensive, as if I was living in a fairy tale, but something inside me was broken. Our days were filled with receptions and obligations. We participated in charity events and public functions where everyone expected greatness and refinement from me. I was the wife of a wealthy businessman, and that put immense pressure on me. Victor tried to be a good husband, but our relationship was far from happy. I could see that his interests lay more in his own affairs and public recognition. We spent little time together, and I felt lonely even in his presence. My mother was pleased with my choice and constantly arranged lunches and dinners for our friends and family. She saw me as a symbol of her own success and social status. She didn't understand how I could refuse Victor's proposal, and this caused tension between us. Mixed feelings raged inside me. On the one hand, I could afford the luxury and pleasures that I had only dreamed of before, but on the other hand, I felt that my soul was trapped in a golden cage, and I had lost my freedom of choice. At some point, I noticed that I was distancing myself from Victor, as if intentionally avoiding close contact. We seemed to be living together, but I was far from him in my heart. One day, as I stood on the veranda looking out the window, I saw a beautiful sunrise. Strangely, it reminded me of Michael and our morning meetings in that little coffee shop. I wondered what my life would be like if I had made a different choice. My life was full of luxury, but inside me, there was emptiness. I realized that money and social status could not replace what I had lost: true love and happiness. This period of my life brought me many lessons. I realized that one should not choose a path based on the expectations of others or social pressure. True happiness lies within us, and no matter how luxurious life may seem on the outside, if it doesn't make us happy, it's not worth it. Over time, I realized that my mother could be proud not of my marriage or status, but of my courage and ability to follow my heart. And I understood that true happiness is priceless, and it comes when we choose the path that corresponds to our true feelings. After several months of marriage to Victor, I realized that I was living someone else's life. Luxury and wealth did not bring me happiness. On the contrary, they made me increasingly lonely and disconnected from myself. My mother was happy, society admired us, but I felt like I had lost myself somewhere. I began to think about Michael. All those moments with him, our morning meetings at the coffee shop, his smile that dispelled my worries, all of that became part of my most precious memories. I realized that something inside me belonged to him forever. One day, when Victor was in a business meeting, I decided to take a step towards finding happiness. I left our luxurious mansion and went to the coffee shop where Michael and I used to meet. I didn't know what to expect, but I felt that it was the right thing to do. When I entered the coffee shop, nothing had changed. The aroma of fresh coffee, the sound of the machines grinding beans, the cozy atmosphere, everything was in its place. I sat at the same table where Michael and I had spent so much time. And then, as if by magic, Michael walked into the coffee shop. His gaze stopped on me and his eyes widened in surprise. He approached me and his smile returned to his face. "Emily, is that really you?" he asked, as if not believing his eyes. I smiled and nodded. "Yes, it's me, Michael." Michael sat across from me and we began to talk as if it hadn't been a day since our last meeting. He told me about his life, his work at the coffee shop, his dreams. I told him about my life with Victor, how I had chosen him because of societal and maternal pressure. Michael listened to me attentively and I could see empathy in his eyes. "Emily," he said, taking my hands in his. "You know that I will always be here for you, but you must choose your own path to happiness." His words made a deep impression on me. I realized that true happiness cannot be found in luxury and wealth. It lies within us. I had to make a choice based on my own feelings and beliefs. Gradually, I began to change my life. I started to learn to listen to myself, my desires and dreams. I realized that I did not have to follow other people's expectations and standards. I began to search for myself, and in that search, I found happiness. Michael and I remained friends, but our relationship was no longer romantic. We both understood that our place in life was different, but our friendship was eternal. Over time, I divorced Victor, and although it was a difficult decision, I realized that it was the only way to my own happiness. My mother, though disappointed, ultimately understood and supported my choice. My life became less luxurious but more fulfilling and real. I found my place in the world and realized that true happiness lies in being oneself and following one's true desires. The moral of this story is that true happiness cannot be bought with money or acquired through status. It lies within us, and to find it, we must listen to our hearts and boldly pursue our dreams.